I pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So something that is easy to see, or maybe I should say something that is very easy to hear, is that we are in the midst of the season for song, right? I mean, that's certainly the case outside the church, as I'm sure you very well know. I mean, it seems like I can't go anywhere these days, not the store, not out on the street, not at the gas pump, not even to the bathroom, actually, without someone letting me know in song that it's the most wonderful time of the year, right? But this being the season of song, well, that's definitely the case, especially for us here in the church. I mean, we'll sing songs today. We're going to sing songs tonight with our kids as they celebrate and do the pageant and sing the carols. Tomorrow at Christmas Eve, we're going to sing lots of songs, lots of wonderful songs for the season. Christmas morning, more songs. This is the season for song in the church. And I was looking through the Gospel of Luke, since we're in Luke's birth story this year, and I was noticing too, and maybe you've noticed, that Luke uses a lot of songs in the telling of the story of Jesus' birth. I mean, in today's gospel reading, we heard it, and then we sang it in the canticle. We sang what's called Mary's song, the Magnificat, that beautiful and powerful song that she sang when she was greeted by her cousin Elizabeth. And then there was Zechariah. We didn't hear it today, but the story goes on. Zechariah was Elizabeth's husband and the father of John the Baptist. And once his tongue is finally loosened, he too will sing of this wonderful gift that God has given his family, John the Baptist, who is to come and who will then go on to pave the way for the Messiah. Tomorrow night, hard to believe, on Christmas Eve, we'll join our song with the song of the angels when we proclaim to the shepherds, "Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth." And the final story in Luke is Simeon, someone we don't hear a lot about. And Simeon sings a song as well. He sings a song of farewell once he has seen that God will fulfill his promise to take care of Israel, and he sees that promise fulfilled in the Christ child. So he sings. So why so much singing, we might ask? Well, I think it's because the author of Luke, he understood very well that songs are wonderfully powerful, right? I mean, there are songs of praise and thanksgiving that unite us with the one to whom we lift our voices when we sing. And likewise, there are songs of courage and promise that help us to then name our hopes. And in the process, bring us and bring them into being. You see, singing is an act of resistance. Now, I don't mean all singing is that way, of course. I mean, sometimes singing is an act of joy. Sometimes it's an act of camaraderie. I mean, if you're a really bad singer, then sometimes it can just be a way of torturing your family and friends with your singing. But singing can absolutely be an act of resistance. I mean, the slaves knew this. When they sang their spirituals, they were both praising God, but they were also protesting the masters who locked them out of their worship. But you see, they couldn't keep them out of the promise of deliverance that they found in the Bible. Civil rights leaders, they knew this. They'd link arms and sing songs like "We Shall Overcome" when so many in society didn't give them a chance to advance their cause of justice or to let alone triumph. Bruce Springsteen, John Fogerty, they knew this. They sang "Born in the USA," "Fortunate Son," which were songs of resistance about how unequal the Vietnam draft was and how the soldiers who came back from that war were treated upon their return. And there were protesters, the protesters in Leipzig, Germany, 1989. They knew the power of resistance songs. Sometimes this element gets overlooked in the histories of the Velvet Revolution, as it was called, but it was very striking to note that for several months preceding the fall of the Berlin Wall, the citizens of Leipzig, every Monday night, they would gather around St. Nikolai Church, the church where Bach wrote most of his cantatas, and they would come with candles and they would sing their songs power, justice, protest. It started out with a little more than 1,000 people, and in the 2 months building up to the fall of the wall, over 300,000 people, half the citizens of Leipzig, gathering together at the church, singing songs, again, of hope and protest and justice, until their songs, united in voice, shook the powers of their country, and then until ultimately changed the world. Now later, when someone asked one of the officers of the Stasi, which was that East German secret police, why they didn't crush this protest just like they had brutally crushed so many others, the officer replied, "We had no contingency plan for song." You know, I think Mary and Elizabeth, they knew all this very well. And what I mean by that is when I think Mary and Elizabeth, they knew just how ridiculous their situation actually was, right? I mean, here they were, two women, one too old to bear a child, one so young she wasn't even married yet both of them called by God to bear children of promise through whom God would then go on to change the world. And they probably knew how little account the world would pay them. Here they were tucked away in the hill country of Judea. I mean, they were so far away from the courts of power or influence or anything very meaningful. They were probably very aware of how hard life was under the Roman oppression that they dealt with. Yet when they were faced with these long odds of their situation, when they were faced with the difficulties of their lives and the challenges of what futures they had ahead of them, they didn't retreat, they didn't apologize, they didn't despair. What'd they do? They sang. They sang the ultimate resistance song. They sang of their confidence in the Lord, their confidence that his promises to upend the powers that be would happen, his promise to reverse the fortunes of the unjust world they lived in, and to lift up all of those who had been overlooked and oppressed for so long. See, when your back's up against the wall, and everything seems dark and grim, when you aren't sure what else to do, you're struggling to find confidence and hope, one of the most unexpected, and yet one of the most powerful things you can do is sing. Now, I was reminded of the power of song 6 years ago. It's right about this time of year. It was the week of and then right after the horrific killing at Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut. 20 first graders killed, 6 adults who were trying to protect them. You know, probably to this day, nothing has ever shaken me more than that terrible event. Now, at the time, I had a first grader that I dropped off at school every day, fully expecting to see him when I picked him up. So you can imagine what was going through my head. And here I am, 6 years later. I still have another first grader right now that I take every day, and I drop him off at school, fully expecting to see him when I pick him up. But you know, that week it happened, that next Sunday morning at church, I mean, that tragedy is still very raw. I mean, still very fresh on everyone's minds. And we came to the service, and we happened to sing, O come, Emmanuel. And one of the verses gave such a powerful and poignant voice to not only the despair, but also to the hope that so many people in that church felt that day. You know, we sang, O come, thou dayspring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to you, O Israel. And there were tears flowing, voices lifted in song. I realized in that moment that singing of light in a world full of darkness is indeed nothing short than an act of resistance. Gracia Grindal, who was a very prolific Lutheran contemporary hymn writer, she starts one of her Advent hymns with a line that says this well. She says, "We light the Advent candles against the winter light," she penned. Not because of it, not during it, but actually against it, reminding us that the light of Advent, like the light of Christ, is lit to protest. It's a bit of resistance against the darkness that so often gathers around us. And given how much the darkness seems to gather around us these days, I'm sure that you probably join me in thinking that this year, this light of Advent, this light of Christ that we're getting ready to celebrate tomorrow, coming again to the world, is coming just at the very right time. As I talk to people, occupational hazard, I talk to a lot of people, right? As I talk to people and they open up their lives to me a bit, the biggest things I can sense and hear is that people are weary, right? People are weary of darkness, weary of sickness, weary of death, weary of struggles and disappointments and very unwelcome changes in their lives, weary of anger and resentment, weary of violence, weary of politicians and government shutdowns, weary of inequality that dominates our communities and our countries, weary of seeing those who need help overlooked so easily, weary of seeing the powerful do whatever they want at the expense of those beneath them. And yet, in the midst of our weariness, in the midst of the darkness that surrounds us, like Mary, we don't retreat. We don't despair. We don't give up on hope. We come here to this place, and what do? We sing, right? And in singing, and then in living out the words that we sing in our actions of our day-to-day lives, we then enter into the work that God is doing to bring light into this world. According to Luke, when Mary sang her Magnificat, when she sang her beautiful song, she didn't just name those promises from God. She actually entered into them. I mean, if you notice, we heard it twice, but if you notice that the verbs in Mary's songs, they're all in the past tense. He has mercy on those who fear him. He has shown the strength of his arm. He has scattered the proud. He has brought down the mighty. He has lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things. He has shown mercy and come to the help of his people. Mary recognizes as she sings that she has already been drawn into the relationship with God, the God of Israel. This is the God who's been siding with the oppressed since the days of Egypt and who has been making promises and keeping them since the time of Abraham. The past tense in this case, it doesn't so much signify that, everything's done, everything's been accomplished. But no, rather that Mary is now included in the story of God's history of redemption. And so also, I believe that is the case for us. When we sing, O come, Emmanuel, for instance, we are drawn into the story of Israel's redemption and not only long for, but also participate in God's promise to bring light and to bring cheer and to dispel death and darkness. Tomorrow, tonight, whenever we sing, O Little Town of Bethlehem, we can feel the hopes and fears in our lives, the hopes and fears of all the years met in the vulnerable babe of Bethlehem. We're going to sing Joy to the World. Sometimes a Christmas song, sometimes an Advent song, but singing that song can create in us the very joy that maybe we've longed for of late, and maybe we've wondered if we'd ever experience again. Singing doesn't just name things, it draws us into the actual experience and the reality of what we voice. God has promised to change the world. And in singing these promises, we enter into that work. We carry the light into the darkness of our lives. We live out in our actions the words we sing with our lips. A few weeks ago, I was driving my first grader to drop him off at school, and it was a really gloomy day, right? Raining, dreary. I feel like something we've had way too much of lately in Roanoke. Does anybody else feel that way? And I'm driving, and I hear my son's voice from the back seat, and he says, "Man, it sure is soupy outside today," which I thought was a pretty appropriate word for the weather, calling it soupy. So some time passed, and he was quiet for a bit. And then I heard his sweet little high-pitched voice start to sing, "This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine," right? It's a song that I know that he had been singing in children's chapel here at church with Miss Chrissy and all his friends here at church. So we got to school, and I got out to give him a hug and tell him I loved him, something I promised myself 6 years ago I would always do. And he said, "Daddy, he said, even though it's soupy out, I'm going to try and let my light shine today." And with that, he was off to whatever first graders do in first grade class. This is a season for song. And as we lift our voices together to sing about what God has done, is doing, and will continue to do, let us remember that our songs are songs of resistance. Resistance to a world that is about to change. For light is coming. Let it shine. Let it shine. Let it shine. Amen.